I bet you've never heard of the legendary oasis of Zerzura. This ancient city is said to be hidden somewhere deep in the Sahara Desert, and its discovery could mean unimaginable riches and untold secrets. According to an anonymous 15th century Arabic guide, the key to unlocking the city lies in the beak of a bird carved on the city gate. Zerzura might not be as popular as Machu Picchu or the pyramids, but that just makes it more mysterious. Legend has it that Zerzura is built around this big oasis somewhere in the desert west of the Nile. Apparently, it's made out of white stone and has all these luxurious houses and gold decorations. The story goes that a scribe wrote down the account of a traveler who stumbled upon Zerzura while looking for his lost camel. At one point in his journey, the man got caught up in a sandstorm, where he got separated from the rest of his group. The traveler kept wandering in the desert for days, and then, out of nowhere, two men showed up and guided him to the city of Zerzura. The traveler described this city as an oasis filled with little birds and made out of pure white stonework. The city is also said to be guarded by giants. In 1835, an English Egyptologist named John Gardner Wilkinson mentioned the city in one of his books. He spoke to a man from Egypt who found the city by accident after days of wandering through the desert. He mentioned some ruins, unusual stonework, and a large oasis surrounded by palm trees. The man even gave some instructions on how the city could be found, indicating that it might be in the western desert of Egypt. But here's the kicker. Even though a group of explorers went out to find Zerzura, they didn't succeed. At the same time, they did stumble upon a bunch of previously unknown oases. In the early 1900s, numerous expeditions were sent to find the city, including one with a fleet of Ford Model A trucks. But, alas, none were successful. Others say Zerzura did exist at one point, but not anymore. It's possible it was swallowed by the desert. It's believed that back in the day, the Sahara Desert was actually green. Scientists even found traces of ancient rivers that flowed through the area 100,000 years ago, creating green corridors across the desert. But Zerzura might have never been real to begin with. Maybe it only existed in the minds of people, a figment of their imagination as they were struggling in the African desert. For thousands of years, people have been obsessed with the hunt for another lost city, Atlantis. But if this place really existed, where on Earth, or under the sea, could it be? According to Plato, Atlantis was an actual place, and it was supposedly located somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, near the Strait of Gibraltar. But how did this mythical city become synonymous with a perfect, paradise-like society? Well, you can thank Ignatius Donnelly for that. The American writer published a book in 1882 where he outlined 13 hypotheses about the existence of Atlantis. Donnelly truly believed that this lost city was where ancient humans lived in peace and joy for centuries. Donnelly even thought that Atlantis was the original source of many ancient civilizations around the world. And if we just followed Plato's clues, we could totally find Atlantis. Sounds like a treasure hunt, right? What inspired Donnelly to go on this quest in the first place, you might ask? Apparently, an amateur archaeologist discovered the city of Troy, using Homer's The Iliad as a guide. Well, if Troy was real, then why not Atlantis? Back in the day, some people believed that America was the legendary Atlantis. Columbus really stirred up some excitement when he brought back news about the New World to Europe. But the real hunt for Atlantis didn't really start until the 20th and 21st centuries. Some people tried to connect the dots between a volcanic eruption on the island of Santorini and the destruction of Minoan settlements. But in 2018, a team of investigators claimed they had nailed it, announcing they had discovered concrete proof that Atlantis had existed. What was their evidence, you ask? A series of mysterious circles in a national park in Spain. But the circles turned out to be nothing more than experimental ponds for studying zooplankton. Let's face it, there's no real evidence that Plato's lost city of Atlantis actually existed. But it doesn't make searching for it any less exciting, does it? The Fountain of Youth isn't a lost city per se, but it is another mythical location that many have claimed to have stumbled upon over the years. Long ago, people were obsessed with the idea of living forever, or at least extending their lives as much as possible. Each culture had its own wild story, like the Greeks talking about a magic fountain that let people live longer, or Alexander the Great finding a river of paradise that could heal the wounded. Japanese legends spoke of hot springs that could make you young again, while the Caribbean locals talked about the restorative powers of the water in one of their own mystical lands. Explorers searched far and wide for these magical waters, but nothing. Probably the most famous of all was the story of the Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon, who thought he'd found it in Florida. Now, Ponce de Leon was quite a character. He sailed with Columbus and became an important figure in the area now known as the Dominican Republic. He found gold in Puerto Rico and even became the island's administrator. But when the ruler of Spain decided to replace him in his duties, he got upset and decided to explore Florida, looking for gold and the elusive Fountain of Youth. He explored the Bahamas, but sadly, he didn't find any gold or magic water. He did, however, make his way to Florida. He explored the coast and even discovered the Gulf Stream. Unfortunately, his last expedition didn't go well, and he was wounded. But the legend of him searching for the Fountain of Youth lived on. Even though historians don't think he was really looking for the Fountain of Youth, thousands of people visit the Fountain of Youth Archaeological Park every year to try the sulfur-smelling water. It's the oldest attraction in Florida, which has been around since the 17th century. Some say the water has unusual properties, but I'll leave that up to you to decide after you visit this place. Norse mythology has its own mysterious land called Thule. It's said to be somewhere between Scandinavia and Iceland, where the sun barely shines and the cold bites hard. The folks there survive on a diet of millet, herbs, fruits, and roots, washed down with a grain and honey brew. As for its exact location, scholars can't seem to agree on it to this day. The legendary ancient Greek explorer Pytheas was said to be the first to stumble upon Thule during his quest for tin mines. He sailed his way up north, passing by Scotland, and after 6 long days of sailing, he reached Thule. The people there, according to Pytheas, were quite primitive, but that's no surprise since they were just simple farmers living off the land. They showed Pytheas where the sun set on the shortest day of the year. They also told him that in winter, the sun never rose at all, and in summer, there was no night. For many years, historians have been debating the true identity of this mythical land of Thule. Some say it's Iceland, while others claim it's Norway. A little bit of progress has been made recently with the help of a team of researchers. If their findings are correct, Thule might be the elusive island of Smola. That's farther south than any of the Norwegian islands that were on the list of contenders. It may be too soon to celebrate, but it does look like Thule has finally been found.
Imagine a place that could literally start at one end, trek over 1,800 miles straight to the west, and still be stuck under that massive canopy. This place is like a haven for all sorts of crazy creatures, hosting around 10% of the world's species. It's always been seen as this wild, untouched paradise where humans haven't messed things up yet. You know, like a glimpse into how the world used to be before we spread like wildfire across every continent, causing chaos everywhere. I'm talking about the Amazon region. That massive jungle turns out to be hiding some seriously cool secrets. For centuries, people have been talking about these lost cities deep within the forest. We're talking about El Dorado, the legendary city of gold that had Spanish explorers going crazy, venturing into uncharted territory never to return. And even in the 20th century, the adventurous Perry Fawcett went looking for the lost city of Z and disappeared into the jungle, leaving us all hanging. Scientists have actually found evidence that ancient cities did exist in the Amazon. But how did they find these hidden ruins in such a dense and remote forest? Well, they've got this awesome technology called LiDAR. Basically, they hopped into a helicopter and used light-based remote sensing to digitally strip away the canopy and reveal the ancient ruins of a massive urban settlement around Llanos de Mojos in the Bolivian Amazon. The place was once home to the Kasarabi culture, which thrived from 500 to 1400 CE. They had these incredible urban centers with huge platform and pyramid structures. They even had raised causeways connecting different suburban-like settlements spread across miles and miles of land. These guys were seriously ahead of their time, and they had an epic water control and distribution system with reservoirs and canals. So yeah, the Amazon rainforest wasn't just some untouched wilderness. It was actually heavily populated and even urbanized for centuries before recorded history of the region began. But the thing is, a bunch of people turned a blind eye to the fact that there were actually some pretty cool architectural sites lurking around here that totally deserve some exploring. Scientists predict that in the next 10 to 20 years, we're going to uncover a ton of these cities, and some might even be bigger than the ones we're talking about here. Michael Heckenberger, an anthropologist with the University of Florida, points out that we've seen some similar settlement features, like moats and causeways, in other parts of the ancient Amazon. This new research reveals something totally mind-blowing. Past examples of urbanism in the Amazon were more like groups of villages connected together, not quite what we'd call urban. You see, they were missing those fancy larger centers with their grand architecture and stuff. But guess what? Llanos de Mojos has got them. This place is the real deal when it comes to a fully urbanized Amazonian landscape. So, in the Llanos de Mojos region, a bunch of ancient settlements have been found. These were home to the Kasarabi people, who were all about hunting, fishing, and farming maize. We're talking about hundreds of sites, spread across 1,700 square miles. But these sites were so remote and hidden in the tropical forest that it was like trying to find a proverbial needle in a haystack. A team of archaeologists weren't going to let that stop them, though. They decided to take to the skies and use some fancy LiDAR mapping technology. Just imagine an aircraft flying over the area, shooting out a bunch of infrared beams. These beams hit the ground and bounce back, giving us the distance to different objects. It's like creating a super detailed map from above. Using computer software, these genius scientists were able to strip away the trees from the images, revealing the Earth's surface and all the ancient archaeological goodies hidden beneath. And boy, did they strike gold. They found a whopping 26 unique sites, including 11 that nobody even knew existed before. So what about these 26 super cool sites? Among them, we've got Landivar and Kotoka, which are like these huge urban centers. And get this, we already knew they existed, but the new maps revealed they cover 1.5 and 1/2 square miles respectively. These centers are surrounded by moat and rampart fortifications, like something out of a medieval castle, and they've got all sorts of crazy stuff inside. We're talking artificial terraces, massive earthen platform buildings, and pyramids that reach over 70 feet tall. All these epic buildings are actually facing the north-northwest. It's like they were trying to align themselves with the cosmos or something. This kind of cosmic worldview can be found in other ancient sites in the Amazon too. Now, let's take a bird's-eye view and strip away all those pesky trees. We can see these two centers in all their glory, and they're actually connected to a whole network of settlements through a bunch of causeways. Picture it like spokes on a wheel, stretching out for miles. Canals also stretch out from these main centers and connect to rivers and Laguna San Jose. It's like they had their own water delivery system going on. These ancient guys totally reshaped the whole landscape with their crazy cosmology. The only bummer is that their impressive architecture was made from mud brick. While it looked amazing back then, it just wasn't as durable as the limestone used by the Maya. What happened to the Kasarabi and their settlements is still a big mystery. But based on dating at the sites, it looked like they disappeared around 1400 CE. way before Europeans arrived in the Amazon. One theory is that a massive drought hit the region and messed everything up. The researchers found these massive water reservoirs at various sites, which is pretty interesting, considering how rainy the Amazon is known to be. Who knows if they were for drinking water or farming fish and turtles? But hey, severe droughts have happened in the past, and it only takes a couple of bad harvests to make people pack up and move on. What's even more interesting is that these communities thrived in the same area where this guy Fawcett we mentioned before went missing while searching for his lost city of Z. Maybe he was onto something after all. This is how it was. Fawcett stumbled upon this super cool document called Manuscript 512 at the National Library of Brazil. It's believed to have been written by a Portuguese explorer. Now, according to this document, back in 1753, a group of explorers discovered the remains of an ancient city. It had arches, a statue, and even a temple with hieroglyphs. But the document didn't spill the beans on where this city was located. So Fawcett got all hyped up about finding this city and made it his secondary mission after his main goal of finding something called Z. At one point, he had to come back to Britain to run some errands, but in 1920 he decided to give it another shot. Fawcett went on a personal expedition to find the city, but it was unsuccessful. 5 years later, Fawcett, his son Jack, and their buddy Raleigh Rimmel disappeared in the Mato Grosso jungle. Some researchers think that Fawcett might have been influenced by info he got from indigenous folks about this place called Kohikagu. Turns out Kohikagu was discovered by Westerners in 1925, and it had the ruins of 20 towns and villages. Up to 50,000 people might have lived here. And get this, the discovery of other earthworks in southern Amazonia totally supports Fawcett's theory. In 2005, an American journalist wrote an article about Fawcett's crazy expeditions and discoveries. He called it The Lost City of Z. Catchy, right? Well, in 2009, he turned that article into a book with the same name. And in 2016, the super talented writer-director James Gray made it into a movie. Now, here's where things get a bit sad. The Amazon region is changing rapidly. Farming, ranching, and energy production are changing this incredible place. And guess what? Those untouched areas with ancient relics won't stay untouched for long. It's a race against time to document and preserve what's left of our past before it's lost forever.
If someone finally invents time travel and you hop on a trip to the past, you won't recognize many of the things you know and love today. The Statue of Liberty and the Egyptian pyramids, some basic gadgets like the remote control and your laptop, and even the corn you have for lunch have all changed beyond recognition. When the pyramids were originally built in ancient Egypt and Giza and other places, they didn't look sandy brown at all. All of them were covered with white limestone. If you had seen them under the hot African sun, you'd have to look away. That's how smooth and shiny they were. Builders used around 6 million tons of this material for the Great Pyramid of Giza alone. It's the largest one you can still see on your trip to Egypt. The local rules were quite a thrifty crowd, and they reused some of the casing stones for other construction projects. A massive earthquake in the 14th century has also loosened some of the stones, so you won't see a lot of limestone, but some of it is still there, on top of the Pyramid of Khafre in Giza. It looks like it has a second peak on top of the first. In ancient times, all pyramids used to have capstones called pyramidions, covered in a mix of gold and silver. Most of them have been lost over the centuries, but you can still see a few of them at museums. They show images of Egyptian deities. The pyramids were probably modeled after a sacred pointed stone, the benben. It represented the rays of the sun. Now, lifting heavy rocks wasn't so simple without the tech we have today. I guess you'll agree with me if you helped your friends move at least once, and they made you carry the couch. But those smart Egyptians of the past thought of that and chose the pyramid shape. It lets the weight distribute evenly throughout the whole thing. The Statue of Liberty has also had a major makeover since it was first unveiled in 1886. Believe it or not, it used to be a shiny brown color, just like a penny. 20 years later, it changed its color to green. It wasn't a fashion statement, but a chemical reaction. The statue is covered with hundreds of thin copper sheets. When copper reacts with air, it naturally forms a protective layer called verdigris. This layer protects what's under it from corrosion, and that's why statues and other things made of copper, brass, and bronze can last so long. When Lady Liberty first turned green, people in authority decided it would be a good idea to paint it all over. It was way before social media, so you couldn't just drop an angry comment under the post describing the idea. But they wrote about it in the local newspapers, and the public didn't love the idea. Then the Times interviewed a copper and bronze manufacturer, and he confirmed they shouldn't repaint it, because removing the protective layer would mean destroying the statue. Over the years, people have suggested painting Lady Liberty several times, but no one has ever done it. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine that lady in any other color, so I guess it's for the better. You love bananas as much as I do? Next time you enjoy a juicy soft one, remember you gotta thank selective breeding for that texture. The original wild bananas had many large, hard seeds and not so much delicious pulp. And hey, who doesn't like a sugary watermelon? It has a history of over 5,000 years, and it used to have bitter, yellowish white flesh and was really tricky to open. Selective breeding saved the day again, and watermelons got way sweeter. Japanese scientists went further and invented the seedless version. Corn's grandmother is a Mexican grass called teosinte. The kernels in this grass were small and hard to get. Farmers from many thousands of years ago saved the seeds only of those plants that were larger or tastier, or with kernels that were easier to grind. Thanks, my friends, for giving us the corn that's edible and even delicious. And just imagine, wild avocados were so small that they could easily fit in the palm of your hand. The pit in them was so large you wouldn't find much edible material inside. They also had a much harder shell than the ones we're used to. You probably wouldn't get a lot of work done without your beloved computer today, but I can't tell you exactly whom to thank for this invention. The ABC from 1942 is one of the contendants for the title of the first computer. It's short for the Atanasoff Berry computer, named after its inventors at Iowa State University. The ABC weighed over 700 pounds. Yep, yours must be way lighter than that. That big boy consisted of around 300 vacuum tubes and had a rotating drum, a little bigger than a paint can, and had small capacitors on it. A capacitor is a gadget that can store an electric charge, like a battery. The ABC could solve problems with up to 29 different variables to help scientists save some time. Like modern computers, it used binary digits, ones and zeros, to represent all numbers and data. Because of that, it was possible to do the calculations electronically. And now, my favorite part, the ABC finished one operation about every 15 seconds. Just for you to compare, it's millions of operations per second now. Unlike the tech we use today, the ABC did not have a changeable stored program, so the program could only do a single task at a time. An operator had to write down the intermediate answer and then dial that back into the computer. Sounds like another reason to be happy we live in the 21st century. That remote control you use for all sorts of appliances has gone a long way too. Nikola Tesla, who gave us alternating current, designed one of the first wireless remote controls back in 1898. He named his invention teleautomation and demonstrated it on a miniature boat controlled by radio waves. The boat had a little metal antenna attached to it. Tesla sent signals to the boat using a box with a lever and a telegraph key, which was his version of a remote control. Those signals set electrical contacts on the boat into motion and moved the rudder and the propeller, and Tesla was controlling the boat. The concept of the remote control soon spread to other gadgets. The first television remote control followed in 1950. It was designed by the Zenith Radio Corporation, called Lazybone. Don't take it personally, please. This Lazybone had a massive cable that was attached to the TV set, and those who tried it didn't fall in love with the invention because they tripped over that cord. I feel your pain, my friends. If you live or work on one of the top floors, you gotta love this one. Meet the first passenger elevator. It traveled at the speed of 40 feet per minute. Not the fastest, I know, compared to today's record, which is 40 feet per second. But hey, it was built back in 1857 in New York and was more of a tourist attraction than a necessity. The elevator had a steam engine hidden in the basement of a 5-story building. 3 years later, they shut it down because the public didn't appreciate it. Otis Tufts filed the first patent for a vertical railway around the same time. His invention included an actual car with a bench inside for people to sit on. Sounds like a great spot to hang out with friends to me. What do you say? Then they started adding elevators to luxurious hotels around the world. They were entire rooms with a rich design, upholstered seats and mirrors on the walls, and sometimes even a small chandelier. There was an obligatory operator who'd close the door and the car would start its super slow ascent. It was still more about style than about speed, so I guess I'd choose the stairs.
Can you tell me what date it is today? Piece of cake. You just look at your smartphone and voila, you immediately know the day, month, and year. But was it always this easy to tell the date? Did the ancient people even have the concept of a year that lasts 365 days? Yes and no. Mayan calendars had cycles. That's close to what we call a year. But the Mayan cycle was much longer, 819 days. And this is where the mystery begins. 819 days compared to what? When does this calendar begin and when does it end? Scientists were asking themselves this question for decades. They discovered and deciphered the Mayan calendar during the 1940s. Recently, 2 American scientists, John Linden and Victoria Bricker, came forward with a solution. So, what did they do differently from their predecessors? The duo deciphered the code by broadening their thinking. They expanded the calendar from 819 days to full 45 years. That's 20 times longer than the original cycle. And a pattern started to emerge. This was a major breakthrough because the Maya told time in a complicated way. You can forget about the easy-to-read Arabic numerals we have today. These ancient people used glyphs. These are tiny images that represent characters, something like the icons on your desktop or universal symbols. When you see a little dot with 3 curved lines above it, you know there is a Wi-Fi network available. The Mayan calendar used glyphs that represented animals or natural phenomena. For example, there were symbols for a jaguar and an eagle. Each glyph marked one day. Each cycle is repeated 4 times, 8 and 19 x 4. Let's call these 4 cycles blocks. The Mayas colored each block differently. Scientists thought these colors corresponded to the 4 cardinal directions. Red was east, white, north. West was black, and finally, yellow marked south. But then the 1980s came. Yeah, this was a weird decade. The calculations were all wrong. Researchers determined that the colors were associated with the position of the sun in the sky. It turned out that the color yellow represented the highest point of the sun, which is called a zenith. White was the lowest point, called the nadir. It seems that the calendar showed just how good the ancient Mayas were at astronomy. This is most evident at Chichen Itza. This principal Mayan city is located on the Yucatan Peninsula, Mexico. There stands an impressive step pyramid. It is dedicated to the feathered serpent deity, and its alignment is perfect. Something marvelous happens here twice a year, during the equinoxes, March and September. These are the times when the sun shines directly over the equator. On these 2 dates, the day and night last the same. At the site of the pyramid, sunlight first illuminates the sculpture of the serpent head at the base of the structure. Then it makes its way up the 91 steps. This creates the illusion that a snake is slithering down the pyramid. Even today, people gather to witness the sight. And it must have been more impressive when the Mayas completed the structure 1050-1300 CE. Do you know what a synodic period is? Neither do I. But Mayan astronomers did. A synodic period is the time that passes before a stellar body does a full lap. For example, this is the period between 2 full moons. When you look from Earth, this period lasts roughly 30 days. And the Mayas were looking at the skies non-stop. They carefully noted the synodic periods of all planets. From Venus to Saturn, these ancient astronomers kept records of nearly all celestial bodies. But what does this have to do with their calendar? The American researchers' calculations revealed the link. Let's take the planet closest to the Sun as an example, Mercury. Its synodic period is 117 days. Multiply that by 7 and you get which number? Exactly 8 to 19, when 17 x 7 equals sign 819? Coincidence? Definitely not. Because synodic periods of other planets also neatly match the magical figure 819. But this is not visible from a single Mayan cycle. Scientists had to expand it several times to discover the pattern. There is a reason why no one could decipher the code for so long. They were focused on a single planet. The trick was to add the Mayan calculation for all the planets. Researchers just needed to see the bigger picture. This brings us to the year 2012. Can you remember that some people thought that the world would end on December 21st? That turned out to be a bust. We are alive and well now. But what started this false rumor? The Mayan calendar, of course. You see, these ancient people based their calendar on long periods of all the planets. That included a lot of complicated math and a lot of multiplying. This 2012 was simply the time when their cycle ended. It is known as the long count. This period is the same as our year. For the Mayas, 2012 was something like the 31st of December for us, just an end of a cycle in which they measured time, so there was no need to panic. Those New Year's Eve parties might be a bit wild, but the world doesn't end on January 1st. The Mayas stretched more than their calendar. Rubber was the name of the game. Yes, you've heard it correctly. These ancient people were making different grades of rubber 3,000 years before one famous American did, Charles Goodyear. They would extract natural latex from the rubber tree. This is a milky substance that can be turned into rubber. And they weren't the only ones. Scientists found evidence that their neighbors, the Aztecs and the Olmecs, did the same. But what did they do with rubber? They didn't need car tires, definitely. But it's cool to have a nice pair of sandals for the beach. The Spanish wrote about rubber sole footwear that natives wore. Sadly, scientists still haven't found them. That would be a big step for archaeology. So the Maya were playful with rubber, literally. Researchers guessed that they produced balls from latex. These were bouncy and ranged in size from a softball to a soccer ball. A typical Mayan ball game, pits, involved 2 hoops. You must be thinking basketball, but not quite. The hoops were set on walls, 23 feet high. Compare that to the NBA standard of 10 feet. And the hoop was the other way around. There is also a sweet side to the story of the Mayas. These ancient people enjoyed chocolate. In fact, the modern word chocolate probably comes from their language, xocolotl. This meant bitter water. Okay, you get the bitter part, but why water? The Mayas didn't produce chocolate in the form we know it today. They didn't make bars of chocolate. They drank it. Smashed cocoa beans made for excellent drinks. The Mayas perfected the mixture over time and even added spices. Anyone up for a fiery chocolate drink with stew peppers and cornmeal? Who knows, maybe this beverage actually tasted well. Cocoa beans were sacred and used as a currency. Researchers believe all social classes got to enjoy it. Free chocolate for all sounds nice even today. But where did the Mayas get clean water for their cocoa drinks? From the oldest known filtration system in the Western Hemisphere. It was based on zeolite. These are minerals that contain aluminum and silicone compounds. And guess what? Modern air and water purifiers still use this material. Mayan tech wins yet again. Back in Europe, Roger Bacon developed a sand filtration system in 1627, some 1,800 years after the Mayas. But what about regions without rivers, lakes, or springs? Mayan engineers had it all figured out. Rainwater. They would carve out large reservoirs in the limestone bedrock. Then, they would coat these underground caves with a layer of a watertight material. The final step was to make small channels that collected water from the hills above. Scientists estimated that just one of these reservoirs could hold on average 10,000 gallons of rainwater, enough to fill 55 modern hot tubs.
A gruesome discovery took place in Egypt some years ago. You want to hear about it? 16 human hands, carefully buried in 4 eerie pits. They didn't look too much like human hands at first, since they were abnormally large, but they were. Weirdly, there were only right hands. No left hands were in sight. It turned out that it points to the practice of an ancient dark ritual. Old Egyptian art and tales talked of a ceremony where warriors would present the right hand of their adversaries as proof of victory and ask for gold in return. Egyptians believed in the afterlife, so cutting off someone's hand meant you cut off their power eternally. Guaranteeing this type of defeat was interesting to the winning party. Here, the fight was between Egyptians versus Hyksos, who lived in what was once known as Canaan. Egypt has always been the center of some history-changing findings, and some time ago, this papyrus was found. If we stretched it open, it would be just a tad bigger than the height of a skyscraper. The world's tiniest skyscraper, which is located in Wichita Falls, Texas. When humans didn't write on their notes app, they wrote on this thing, made from the medulla of a papyrus plant. Around 2,000 years ago, ancient Egyptians wrote something reminiscent of a book where they describe most of their funerary traditions and their visions of the afterlife. It's considered one of the most important texts from ancient Egypt and is still sold in bookstores to this day. This ancient manuscript was unearthed from a chamber located just south of the Pyramid of Djoser, located in Saqqara. Oh yes, Djoser is the oldest pyramid in Egypt and not the Giza pyramids like most people think. So recently, the site of Saqqara buzzed with excited archaeologists who probably found one of Egypt's oldest complete mummies. They believe that this beautiful and well-preserved mummy was that of a wealthy man. He was discovered in a deep shaft, covered in layers of gold leaves. There are many symbols that show he was an important and wealthy man, like the band he wore on his head, the bracelet on his chest, and the fact that he was embalmed with a tunic, which was reserved for Egypt's finest. The most exciting part of the entire discovery was finding the resting place sealed with mortar, just as the ancient Egyptians had left it 4,300 years ago. Now this may sound weird, but back in 2008, archaeologists discovered a missing pyramid. Now it went missing because it deteriorated over the span of 4,000 years. Today, you can only see its base. It was a pretty important site back in ancient times. It is said that around the area of the pyramid, the ancients hosted a special type of ceremony where high priests would carry mummified remains of sacred bulls. Now, here's a fun fact. Ancient Egyptians believed that Apis bulls were earthly incarnations of the city deity of Memphis and was connected to rites of fertility. It wasn't just any Apis bull, though. They needed to be all black, with a single white mark between its horns and a bunch of very specific characteristics. They were selected by the local priests and honored until they passed away. After that, they were mummified and buried in underground galleries. Meanwhile, this missing pyramid sort of disappeared around the 1800s. It was a German archaeologist who first found it in the village of Saqqara. He called it the Headless Pyramid when he first found it. But then, years after the official discovery, the desert sand came along and covered the whole thing. There were some excavations between the 19th and 20th centuries, but they weren't too systematic. That's why scientists were so thrilled when they dug an entire pyramid's base after removing the 25-foot mound of sand that was covering it. Oh, and it turns out American archaeologists are excavating a cemetery in Egypt that could contain over 1 million mummified bodies. So far, archaeologists have dug around 1,700 mummies. One of the main differences from other classic Egyptian mummies is that these people weren't kings and pharaohs. They were commoners that most likely lived about 1,500 years ago, when Egypt was controlled by the Roman and Byzantine empires. The name of the cemetery is cool, though, the Way of the Water Buffalo, just in case you want to check it out on your next trip. Other than bulls and buffaloes, ancient Egyptians also liked baboons. Are you seeing a pattern here? In the beginning of the 20th century, archaeologists discovered a site filled with mummified baboons in a place called, guess what? The Valley of Monkeys. An animal wouldn't have been mummified if it wasn't considered important. Certain animals were more important than others, since they were linked to specific deities. Jackals were connected to Anubis, the ancient god of the afterlife, and cats were likened to the female deity Bastet. Baboons were a pretty big deal, since they were believed to be connected to Thoth, the deity of wisdom and advisor to Ra, one of Egypt's supreme deities. The archaeologists who studied these animals weren't too happy. They think these baboons were kept inside and were deprived of sunlight for most of their lives. They had extreme vitamin D deficiencies and they were poorly fed. Maybe Thoth got angry with these baboon keepers. Just a guess. Since there's never a boring day for archaeologists in Egypt, they also found human mummies with golden tongues. Since Egyptians were all about the afterlife, they believed that golden tongues might help a person speak once they pass to the other side. I mean, it's a long shot, but hey, why not? Some of these mummies were placed in wooden coffins with goods, such as necklaces, pottery, golden artifacts in the shape of lotus flowers and scarab beetles, and iPhones. Just kidding. A new temple was also unearthed recently in Egypt. Scientists believe it was dedicated to honor Zeus Cassios. That deity would be a cross between Zeus, the almighty Greek deity of the sky, and Mount Cassios. While digging around the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, archaeologists spotted 2 pink granite columns poking out of the ground, and bingo. They believe these columns represented the temple's front gate and collapsed during an earthquake many years ago. And speaking of deities, there weren't only super serious deities. Recently, scientists unearthed a golden ring in a city south of Cairo. No, Frodo, it's not magical. It was a normal gold ring, but it had the depiction of the deity of fun, officially named Bes. This deity is often described in sacred texts as a happy, chubby dwarf. Today, many tattoos we get are sorta deprived of any sense and are made of aesthetic purposes only. In ancient Egypt, though, women would get tattoos as a token of protection for childbirth. That's what scientists think, at least. Around the Nile region, scientists found some mummies that had well-preserved tattoos, which is a rarity since the skin deteriorates so easily. 2 of these women tattooed their lower backs, and the drawings were simple. They were mostly pictures, including that same chubby dwarf we just talked about, Bes. He also had a side hustle as the protector of women during childbirth. Now, would you believe me if I told you ancient Egyptians invented robots? No? Well, that's because that's not entirely true. Sure, they were astronomers, mathematicians, and engineers, and somehow they also squeezed an eccentric invention into that package. An automated deity some scientists called Hathor. This wooden statue had been in the Metropolitan Museum of Art for years before someone noticed its secret. With the help of an X-ray machine, specialists discovered a mechanical operating system inside it. The pulley-like axis goes from the statue's shoulder to her left leg. When the system rotates, the statue raises and lowers her hand. Hey, pick me! Pick me! I got my hand up here.
One of the most unexplored and mysterious places on Earth is located in plain sight. It's one of the most majestic monuments of humankind. The wonder of the ancient world hides a secret that scientists and archaeologists still can't solve. This is the Great Sphinx of Giza in Egypt. The huge sculpture of a lion with a human head was carved out of rock about 4,500 years ago. Scientists still don't know the exact date of its creation and are also unaware of who built it and what for. There are many assumptions and theories, but none of them has been confirmed. Most people have seen this majestic sculpture either in photographs or in reality, but almost no one knows what's hidden underneath it. The statue of the Sphinx was carved from a single piece of limestone. It was painted. The remains of color pigment on the surface prove this. In the distant past, the Sphinx looked much brighter and more colorful than what we see now. But even after thousands of years, its greatness hasn't diminished. And by the way, Sphinx is not the real name. It was invented by the Greeks about 100 years or more after its creation. Initially, the Egyptians called the statue Hor-em-Akhet. There are many legends and theories saying the Sphinx is there for a reason. It's like a watchdog that guards the tomb of the pharaoh and the secrets of ancient Egypt. These legends become more plausible when archaeologists discovered hidden entrances at the feet of the Sphinx. They believe that these secret passages are the beginning of the tunnels leading to the halls with treasures. You can find a lot of stories on the internet that claim the Sphinx hides the Hall of Records, a repository filled with ancient and secret knowledge. One of the main artifacts of this repository is supposed to be the records of the ancient mythical state of Atlantis. According to legends, the entire library from this city was moved under the Sphinx. The entrance to this library must be located next to the Sphinx's right paw. Many archaeologists tried to find this entrance, but came away empty-handed. Also, there are many images with detailed diagrams of the underground city that consists of a network of tunnels and chambers under the Sphinx. Someone says there are structures as tall as 12-story buildings hiding underground, but there's no evidence of this. Archaeologists, even after millennia, continue to explore the mysterious sculpture. At the same time, many Egyptians don't want to learn more about the Sphinx. They're terrified of awakening something supernatural. In 1998, scientists discovered tunnels leading to empty caves under the Sphinx. They found evidence of earlier excavations there. It's quite possible that someone managed to find the treasures and take them away. Some people believe Egyptians found some kind of artifact under the Sphinx that has the power of unknown advanced technologies. The artifact is so powerful that it can change the course of history. Of course, most theories are just fairy tales of conspiracy fans, but it's a confirmed fact that the Sphinx hides a system of caves and rooms. There are so many rumors surrounding the Sphinx that it's impossible to understand what's true and what's false. In any case, it's difficult and dangerous to study the sculpture because active excavations can destroy it. And then the entrance to the underground rooms can get blocked by rocks and lost forever. Also, further exploration requires a lot of money, and financing is not always easy to find. But the main reason? It's too risky. There's no guarantee that people will be able to get out of the underground labyrinths. For these reasons, scientists and archaeologists have been exploring this majestic structure for so long. Another famous architectural monument with a secret is Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. Everyone admires the images of the US presidents' faces carved into the rock, but few people know that there's a secret room hidden behind the head of Abraham Lincoln. The architect of Mount Rushmore wanted to carve slabs on the rock with the record of the main stages of the country's history. But his plan was too complicated to carry out. Then he was offered to implement it on a much smaller scale, to build a secret room inside the mountain. The idea was to save this knowledge so that future generations will always remember the history of their country. Unfortunately, the architect didn't have time to finish his work. The construction stopped for several decades. But in the late 90s, the project was resumed. Porcelain enamel panels depicting the history of the US were placed in the room. It's possible that these plates will be stored there forever. But people can't see them, at least for now. The room is inaccessible to tourists as it's too difficult to get inside. Another secret room is located in the Empire State Building. More precisely, it's not even a room, but a place where you can take cool photos. Almost all tourists gather on the observation deck of the 86th floor to enjoy a stunning view of Manhattan. But there's another deck with panoramic windows on the 102nd floor. There are way fewer people there because almost no one knows about that place. Fortunately, access to this deck is open to everyone. You probably won't have to wait in line for a long time to take a photo. You'll feel special because you're in such a secret place where there are almost no people. But the coolest place is even higher, on the 103rd floor. This is a spacious observation deck where celebrities get their photographs taken. It's not a public place, but if you know the right people, you can get there. There are almost no security measures on the site. Only a low ledge between you and an abyss. That's why crowds of people are forbidden from coming here. It's not so easy to get there, and you're unlikely to succeed without a guide. First, you need to choose the right elevator that will take you there. Then you'll go through several engineering rooms filled with pipes, electrical panels, and other technical stuff. The final part of your way is a set of stairs inside a tiny corridor. And here you are, at the top of New York. Now we're in Paris. See the Eiffel Tower? Inside it, there are restaurants and observation decks. But if you try hard, you can find a secret apartment. Now it's a museum, but it was built so that people could live in it. The architect of the tower, Gustav Eiffel, created this apartment in 1889 for himself. It's almost at the very top of the Eiffel Tower. Imagine what a beautiful view he observed every day. He was the first and only tenant. No one else could gain access to this place. When the architect passed away, the apartment remained empty for a long time. Only recently, they restored it and turned it into a museum. Inside, the epoch of the last century is recreated. They even put wax figures of Gustav Eiffel, his daughter, and the American inventor Thomas Edison inside the room. This place is filled with an endless stream of passengers, office workers running late, visitors from other cities, noise, and train whistles. At Grand Central Station in New York, among all these sounds, you can hear the sound of a ball hitting a racket, if you're in the right place. A real tennis court is hidden inside New York Central Station. It belongs to a tennis club that arranges corporate games for employees of many companies. The club was opened in the 60s. Now we're moving to London, Charing Cross Road. It isn't easy to find one secret place here. To do this, you need to look carefully at your feet. Do you see these sewer grates in the asphalt? Inside them, you can notice two signs with the name Little Compton Street. Yeah, there's another street right below you. It disappeared from all maps at the end of the 19th century. Charing Cross Road was built over it. The identification signs that you see are part of old engineering tunnels. There's another interesting place in London. It's located in the southeast corner of Trafalgar Square. At first glance, it looks like a thick lamppost, but there are too many tourists walking around. You come closer and realize that one person can easily fit inside the post. The lamppost belongs not to an electrician, but to a police officer. Yeah, this is the smallest police station in the world. It was built in the 1930s and used as a watch post. Officers had to sit there one by one and watch Trafalgar Square. That always attracted a lot of pickpockets and all kinds of other criminals.
Summers in the Middle East get so hot that they change the landscape dramatically and make entire cities resurface from the past. That's what happened in 2018 when the city, built by a mysterious empire on the Tigris River, was finally released from its water trap. Archaeologists rushed to the location as they didn't want to miss a rare chance to excavate the site and learn more about the history of the place. They believe they've found the Bronze Age city Zekiku, founded over 3,000 years ago and fully submerged in the 1980s when a dam was built in its place. It used to be a busy hub for the Mitanni Empire for caravans on the popular trade route. It had water, which is a rarity in the area, and it was a guarantee for success. We know very little about the once powerful empire, as scientists haven't found any written chronicles in the excavated sites. That's why the archaeologists were thrilled to find an entire palace for the local ruler. Several years later, when the area became free from the water again, they found some fortifications to protect the city from foes. The highlight of their expedition was finding a huge public storehouse for trade goods and harvests, piles of wheat and barley, and imported metal and wood. Bread was the staple food for the locals, and they also loved big pots of vegetable soups and stews for lunch. Each household kept sheep, goats, cows, and pigs, so they had a steady source of milk and meat for special occasions. All the constructions found so far were built from bricks molded from mud. The walls that were underwater for over 40 years are so well preserved as if they went down yesterday. The royal palace stands out as it's larger than the other constructions, has thicker walls, and even pavements made of baked mud bricks that were sealed to be waterproof. The local king must have been in good relations with the emperor of the larger empire, of which Akiku was dependent. Traders who lived in the city collected wooden beams and took them to storehouses. The beams arrived down the Tigris River from the forests in the mountains in the north and east of Mesopotamia. Merchants came here to sell their goods and then crossed the Tigris on their way to the borderlands. Zakiku was thriving as a center of commerce for about 6 centuries until it was hit by a massive earthquake in 1350. Archaeologists found 5 ceramic vessels holding over 100 clay tablets made close after the earthquake. It's almost a miracle that small tablets of unfired clay managed to survive underwater for decades. People who created those must have carved notes on clay while it was still wet. They wrote about anything, from newly stored harvests to notes for other kingdoms. Then they would let the message dry in the sun. Scribes even had to learn a different language so that everyone outside the city could read it. Scientists believe the tablets they found used to be part of a private archive. They hope to decipher the notes to learn more about the history of Zakiku and the whole empire after the terrible earthquake. The damage to the buildings was so enormous that it was impossible to restore Zakiku to its former glory, and if there had been any survivors, they must have left the city. Several decades later, the Assyrians, who also lived in Mesopotamia, settled here. They built their houses on the ruins of the abandoned city and used whatever structures they could find from the previous residents as outer walls. But they stayed here only for 50 years, then decided to build a new capital on more fertile soil to make some good cash from agriculture. Archaeologists working in Zakiku had to halt excavations when the water levels went back up and covered the city. They sealed the ruins in tight-fitting plastic sheets and put stones and gravel on top. They hope it will help protect the priceless site from water erosion and prevent it from disappearing again. They realize how important water from the dam is for the region, but if it recedes again, they say they'll definitely continue the excavations. There was a bustling community in today's Taklamakan Desert in China around 1,600 years ago. It lived along the Nile River, which ran through the desert for miles and got its water from the melting snow in the mountains. After 3 years of work in the area, archaeologists and scientists managed to dig up 8 tombs in the desert. Thanks to the desert heat, the clothes and artifacts inside them were almost as good as new. The people who wore those must have lived in the ancient city of Naya. Naya used to be part of a prosperous kingdom at the heart of the Silk Road trading route and had a population of over 3,000 people. Then, desert sands went rogue and swallowed the city whole. Archaeologists only found the ruins of Nija in the early 20th century. Scientists from different countries have tried to solve its mysteries. It looks like the tombs discovered at the end of the 20th century belonged to the wealthy. There were some expensive items inside: a quiver and bow, metal arrowheads, gold earrings, and a glass bead necklace, a lacquer box with a comb, makeup, and a sewing kit in one of the tombs. There was also some silk of top quality, and even the bright colors like green and yellow haven't faded on it. The fabric also had Chinese characters with quotes from historical books, which helped scientists identify the period in which it was made. Archaeologists later found a large dwelling site and the clearing of 3 ruined buildings. It will probably take many more years to understand why the city had fallen and what happened to its people. Saudi and French archaeologists teamed up near Riyadh, the Saudi Arabian capital, and stumbled upon an ancient settlement dating back 8,000 years. The scientists used all sorts of cool tech, like laser scanning, drones, and aerial photography, to unearth this Neolithic-era gem. They found the settlement in a local archaeological hotspot. Among the treasures they uncovered were a stone temple, remnants of an altar, and over 2,000 graves. All these finds tell us about ancient practices and rituals. The team also found the foundations of 4 massive buildings, corner towers, and open-air courtyards, all with underground reservoirs to store water for agricultural use. There was also a smart irrigation system with canals and cisterns, which let the city thrive in one of the driest deserts in the world. Rock drawings etched into the nearby mountain depicted the daily life of the locals. The excavations have been going on in the area for over 40 years, and scientists still keep finding new artifacts to answer more of their questions. Fishers have stumbled upon ancient bones, tools, and artifacts that are 9,000 years old on the North Sea floor. British and Dutch archaeologists and paleontologists rushed to see the finds as they were hoping it could be evidence of the submerged Doggerland. And they weren't disappointed. There were even perfect sets of footprints left by Mesolithic people who lived here. 12,000 years ago, during the last major ice age, the British Isles weren't islands at all. There was a landmass made of many hills, marshlands, and dense forests that connected them to the European continent. That landmass was Doggerland, where a prehistoric hunter-gatherer society lived and thrived. But then, the sea level started going up at the speed of 3 to 6 feet a century as glaciers were slowly but surely melting. The locals had to move to areas that today belong to England and the Netherlands. Experts decided to learn more about the history of Doggerland, using data from oil companies working in the North Sea. So far, they've created digital models of what the area of 18,000 square miles might have looked like before it vanished beneath the waves. They still need to analyze samples of ancient insects and plants and the DNA of animals to get a full picture.
Researchers have found almost 1,000 previously hidden Maya settlements in the tropical lowlands of what is now northern Guatemala. They did it with LiDAR, light detection and ranging lasers, which they used to scan areas from the air. The region we're talking about is pretty vast. All those structures and buildings they saw over there stretch across about 650 square miles. And these spots were supposedly occupied thousands of years ago. It seems all these structures were pretty densely packed, so people lived close to each other. They had at least 417 ancient villages, towns, and cities where they could identify boundaries. These structures and buildings were actually a part of a state that looked like a kingdom. Some of these settlements were built as sports courts, civic, ceremonial, and religious centers, and residential homes. There were also massive palaces, platforms, dams, pyramids, and causeways across that area. People who lived there also had reservoirs where they collected water. So, they needed the power to organize thousands of specialists and workers. And they also needed many skilled people to build such structures without the technologies we have today. They needed lime producers, architects, mortar and quarry specialists, lithic technicians, those who took care of legal enforcement, and other important roles to establish the true community. This cool laser scanning system researchers used while exploring this area can even penetrate very dense ecosystems and vegetation. The light bounces off different surfaces and then creates a digitally reconstructed map. This map is based on how much time it takes for the pulses to get back to a receiver. So, with this laser system, they discovered there were also lowlands for agriculture. So why exactly did the Maya settle in this region? It was a specific area. Plus, it was hard to build such an amazing kingdom in a tropical rainforest climate. Back in the old times, ancient peoples had mostly inhabited areas in drier climates. Over there, they would build water resources, which were some sort of the basis of society and a source of life. An example of this is Teotihuacan of Highland Mexico, although they did have a couple of navigable rivers they could use for transport and trade. But these rainforest areas had their advantages too. The Maya used natural resources like limestone, which was their primary building material, salt, and the volcanic rock obsidian, which they used for different tools. Also, they managed to find enough dry land to live and build homes there. The lowlands were seasonal swamps called bajos, and they were perfect for agriculture because of the fertile soil. Generally, the Maya built settlements that could endure rainy periods too. They were ready for different circumstances, including flood and drought, which is something you could see in how they built houses. Their architecture was also one piece of evidence that showed their community was like a centralized kingdom-like state, which shows they stuck together through tough times. The Mayan Empire was very powerful, and it reached its peak about the 6th century CE. They were excellent at pottery, agriculture, writing, mathematics, and calendars. They were the ones who created complex calendar systems, such as the calendar round, which is based on 365 days. Although some believe the Mayan calendar predicted December 21st, 2012 would be the end of the world, it was just a coincidence with the end of a certain full cycle. They would call it the long count calendar, and it lasts 5,125 years. The Mayan people left behind an impressive amount of astonishing architecture and symbolic artwork. Most of their stone cities ended up abandoned by 900 CE. No one still knows why the Mayan civilization in that area collapsed, although there are some theories. Some think that by the 9th century, these people had exhausted the resources around them to the point that they could no longer feed and sustain such a big population. Others believe some city-states didn't get along that well, so they broke down the traditional system of power they used to have. Some say it was all because of a very long period of drought. It could be a combination of all these factors, though. But one Mayan city, located on an island, even survived until the 17th century. It was long after the rest of the Mayan civilizations had been destroyed or abandoned. If you're a traveler, you might know the town by its modern name, Flores. Scientists believe about 2,000 people lived there. The earliest Maya people were farmers. They cultivated crops like beans, squash, corn, and cassava. As they had many interesting ingredients, they created hundreds of cool recipes. Many of those are still present even today. For example, in modern Mexican cooking. And especially popular are papayas, cacao, avocados, squash, pineapples, chili peppers, beans, and so on. Even though the Maya mostly practiced a kind of primitive type of slash-and-burn agriculture, there is also evidence of them using some more advanced farming methods, like terracing and irrigation. And they were big chocolate lovers. More than 3,500 years ago, the Olmecs of Mesoamerica probably turned out to be the first to realize that it takes some work for us to get such a cool thing as chocolate. But the Maya were the ones who turned it into a true form of art. Scientists found out about it when they found cacao in Mayan pottery. Their chocolate would be mixed with honey, water, cornmeal, and chili peppers. That's how you get a spicy, savory, hot chocolate beverage you can try even today in Mexico and Central America. Also, they used written language in their books. Their paper was made from fig tree bark, and using strips of that paper, they created a large library of books. Books made of this material are called codices, and 4 of these can still be found today. Sadly, many books were lost over time because of the humid climate or some human factors. The classic Maya built a bunch of palaces and temples that had a stepped pyramid shape. They decorated them with inscriptions and reliefs, which have earned them the reputation of being incredible artists of Mesoamerica. For the Mayans, flat foreheads were the most desirable thing on someone's face. They were generally really into aesthetics, and having a flat forehead was one of the main things where you could meet their highest aesthetic standard. They also liked to glam up their looks with makeup and clothing. Also, the Mayans were master tattoo artists. Actually, they were one of the first civilizations that started doing such forms of body art. They had a rich culture and believed in many things, such as fairies. Many civilizations across the globe believed in these mythical creatures, which had different names everywhere. The Mayans called those creatures aluxes. They would make sculptures of aluxes from wood or clay, take them to the forest, and hide in some secret spots. The Maya believed these sculptures would come to life during the night and take the role of guardians of their land, animals, and crops. The Maya believed caves were entrances that led to the underworld. You can even visit some of these caves if you like. For example, you can explore the jungles of Quintana Roo and Yucatan near Cancun. There are many spots where researchers found artifacts the Mayans had left behind. They were one of the first cultures that learned how to use rubber latex and make, for example, rubber balls for the many interesting games they had. They used natural latex and then probably mixed it with some other natural substances. That's how they came up with the bouncy balls they played with. They also built cool steam baths. The Maya had structures made from stone that looked like something we know today as bathtubs. Plus, they were building heated stone structures we know as sweat houses. Researchers found these in El Salvador and Guatemala, and they were previously hidden under volcanic ash. Imagine discovering an ancient city without leaving the comfort of your home. In 1963, a man in the Nevşehir province of Turkey did exactly that. He was renovating his house. He knocked down a wall in his basement and found a mysterious room. He continued digging and saw a tunnel. This is how Derinkuyu underground city was found. Derinkuyu is one of the deepest multi-level underground settlements of Cappadocia and in all of Turkey. This engineering masterpiece has 8 levels. The inhabitants living on those floors had access to cellars, storage areas, chapels, a school, a study room, and other structures. All floors are connected by an extensive network of tunnels. It's believed that the underground city was built as a shelter. You can't see the construction from the outside. Its depth is approximately 279 feet. The complex was large enough to shelter about 20,000 people, plus their livestock and food supplies. There's also a 180-foot ventilation shaft. People used it both for ventilation and as a well. The well supplied water both to the villagers living on the surface and to those hiding in the underground city. Interestingly, those living on the bottom levels were able to cut off the water supply for the upper and ground levels. This kept the water safe from potential poisoning. The place was designed for protection. The tunnels could be blocked from the inside with huge round rolling stone doors. The passageways were extremely narrow. Potential invaders had to enter the tunnels one at a time. Seems like they thought of everything in the 7th century BCE. Archaeologists believed the Phrygians were the ones who first built the levels. After them, the structure was used and enhanced in Roman times. This was when the chapels were added. The golden time of Derinkuyu, however, was during the Byzantine era. But how did these people manage to create such tunnels? Well, the rock they carved them into wasn't usual. It was soft volcanic rock. It appeared due to a geological process that began millions of years ago. Volcanic eruptions covered the area in thick ash. It then solidified into this soft rock. When the natural forces of wind and water eroded softer parts, only hard elements remained. Fun fact, fairy chimneys are also made of intricately shaped volcanic soft rock, but they formed naturally without any human intervention. I'm still in Turkey, but this time, my destination is Çanakkale, where a myth came to life. For 3,000 years, people believed that Homer's Iliad was fiction and that Troy never existed. In 1863, everything changed. Expatriate Frank Calvert discovered ancient ruins in western Turkey. He was convinced they belonged to the ancient city of Troy. Heinrich Schliemann examined this area in 1868. That's when Troy saw sunlight again after all those centuries. Troy has complex layers. Over the years, 9 ancient cities were built on top of one another. Historians say that the area was strategically located between Europe and Asia, so it became a prosperous trade and cultural center. This strategic position made Troy attractive throughout history. After the Trojan conflict, the city was abandoned between the years 1100 to 700 BCE. Then Greek settlers rediscovered the area, and Alexander the Great ruled there. The Romans then invaded the city. Speaking of this event, the first thing you would see when visiting the site is a replica of the wooden Trojan horse from a movie shot in 2004. The next stop is Lothal. In the 1950s, Lothal and several other Harappan sites were discovered in India. These new provinces extended the boundaries of the Indus Valley civilization. Lothal was an important part of the Harappan civilization. It had vast cotton and rice fields. Plus, it had a bead-making factory. Beads were made from semi-precious stones, like agate. Many of these beads were later found in Mesopotamia, which serves as evidence that Lothal was a thriving trading port. Archaeologists believe that the city was part of an ancient trade route. Traces of agriculture? Check. Traces of trade? Check. What else? The remains of residential buildings, streets, bathing pavements, and drains. Some real city planning, and impressive examples of early urbanization. The town was well constructed. They were modern houses. Some of them had 6 rooms, bathrooms, a large courtyard, and even a veranda. Lothal also had the world's oldest known dock. It linked the city with the Sabarmati River and the trade route. The ancient Mayan city of Calakmul is located in southern Mexico in the tropical forest of the Tierras Bajas. From 500 CE to 800 CE, Calakmul was home to over 50,000 people. There was a central plaza surrounded by outer districts. And if we count both the inhabitants of all those outer areas and those who lived in the center, Calakmul had a population of more than 1.5 million people. It was a city that was habitable for 12 centuries. It's believed that the place had more constructions than any other excavated Maya settlements in the region. After 1000 CE, the Maya civilization there faced a downfall. The settlement that was once the center of Mesoamerica was almost completely abandoned. The ancient city was at the heart of the second largest tropical forest in America. The site is well preserved, so today, if you were to visit it, you would be able to picture what life looked like in ancient Mayan times. The city remains include architectural complexes and sculpted monuments, defensive systems, quarries, water management features, agricultural terraces, massive temple pyramids, and palaces, not to mention a variety of body ornaments and other accompanying objects. It proves that complex state-organized societies lived in this tropical forest. The Mayans depicted nature in their paintings, pottery, sculptures, rituals, and even food. I'm moving on to a place people thought didn't really exist. The city of Thonis Heracleion appeared only in a few inscriptions and ancient texts. Turns out, it was waiting to be discovered for thousands of years. Scientists searched the majority of the coast of Egypt. But then, archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team detected a colossal face looking at them from under the water. The ancient city of Heracleion was discovered completely submerged 4 miles off Alexandria's coast. In the ruins of the lost city, there were 64 ships, 700 anchors, and a treasure trove of gold coins. Archaeologists consider a 16-foot-tall statue and the temple remains the most important findings discovered by the expedition. Back then, the city had ceremonies and celebrations that took place in the Temple of Amun. The ruins and artifacts were made from granite and diorite, so they were in good condition even after having been in contact with water for centuries. They give people a glimpse into what life was like 2,300 years ago in one of the most important trade ports of the world. The city had a network of canals. You can think of it as an ancient Egyptian Venice. The canals linked many separate harbors and anchorages. Towers, temples, houses, and other structures were also linked by bridges. Thonis Heracleion was the country's main port for international trade and the collection of taxes. No one really knows how the city ended up submerged, but archaeologists connect it with natural causes. At the end of the 2nd century BCE, most probably after a flood, Heracleion got covered with water. Then, Alexandria, the city founded by Alexander the Great, became more glorious than Heracleion. Before Alexandria's fame, Heracleion was the main port of entry to Egypt. So, after the disaster, many ships heading for Heracleion had to change their route and go to Alexandria. Heracleion lost its glory until its rediscovery in 1933. Mesa Verde is an American national park in Colorado. The park is the largest archaeological preserve in the U.S., with more than 5,000 sites, including 600 cliff dwellings. Mesa Verde means green table in Spanish. The name comes from the shape of the mountains in the area, with flat tops and steep sides. The park is an ancestral Puebloan archaeological site. Starting from 7500 BCE, A group of nomadic Paleo-Indians seasonally lived in Mesa Verde. They were hunters, gatherers, and crop farmers. They built the first pueblos in the region. By the end of the 12th century, the Mesa Verdeans began constructing massive cliff dwellings, which are now the best-known structures in the park.
You are lost deep within the jungle in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. There are strange noises all around you, and to make it worse, the sun is setting. Soon, you'll be alone in the middle of an unknown rainforest. Guess it was a pretty bad idea to come looking for El Dorado on your own, wasn't it? You keep walking as fast as you can, when suddenly, wait! What's this you're seeing? It looks like large stairways made out of stone. This definitely doesn't look natural, so you take a picture. Maybe you didn't strike gold, but you might have just found something relevant. Congratulations, you found Akamtun, a long-lost Mayan city, hidden 37 miles into the jungle. The name literally translates to stone column. Stone was probably in at the time, so these guys used a lot of it to build their pyramids, houses, and even ball courts. If you ever thought that Europeans invented ball games, think twice. Mayans loved to play ball games for recreational purposes. Akamtun is part of a series of other long-lost Mayan cities that are being discovered with the help of new technology nowadays. We'll talk more about the other ones in a jiffy. Perhaps the biggest surprise of this one is that it was surrounded by wetlands, which is why the city was built on high ground. The city was monumental, covering an area of over 120 acres. That would be as big as 90 football fields right next to each other. Scientists have found proof that Akamtun had pyramids of up to 49 feet high, and that it was likely an important social hub between 250 and 1000 CE. This is definitely a game changer. But lost Mayan cities began to be unearthed in the 19th century. Modern technologies, such as LiDAR imaging, help archaeologists see through dense canopies of the forests. This means that people don't really have to risk getting lost in the tropical jungle like you did at the beginning of this video. LiDAR works sort of like an X-ray. It sends out laser beams that can detect any signs of ruins or ancient constructions. According to space archaeologist Sarah Parchak, satellite imagery has been a key player in discovering ancient cities in South America, Egypt, and other places. Sarah herself spends most of her days scouring images for any signs of where there could have been cities long ago. She says that more often than not, what happens is that ruins are covered by vegetation, soil, or sand, which makes them super tricky to find. But thanks to these awesome tools, scientists also made the huge discovery of ancient Mayan causeways, which spread throughout old Mayan territories. I mean, take a look at these roadways. You'd expect to see ruins like this in places such as Portugal, England, or the United States. I'm talking about 130 feet wide roads painted white to help travelers journey through the nighttime. Scientists recently unearthed a 110-mile network of roads such as these, and they think this dates back to before the first registered Mayan highways we've known so far. These roadways, which sometimes ran over the swampy ground and were even elevated at times, are being called the world's first superhighways. Even if there is no registry of animal-powered vehicles, it's believed that the Maya used them to travel around a network of possible 964 settlements. They were built like a huge spiderweb, and from what archaeologists have gathered, this huge system of roads worked to connect a big system of economic and social interactions between Mayan cities. This completely debunks the traditional idea that the Mayan pre-classic period, which dates back to 2000 BCE, was made of small, tribal settlements. Imagine the manpower and engineering ability you need to muster to build something close to these white highways. Scientists believe that these causeways were built pretty much the same way as the Mayans built their pyramids, with a mixture of mud and quarry stone. Oh, and using several layers of limestone to make them white. That's pretty cool, right? But let's take a few steps back for a moment to get some context. The Mayans were one of the biggest pre-Columbian civilizations living in the Americas. Until now, Experts believe that at its apex, the Mayan civilization consisted of over 40 cities, with a population of millions of people. That's a lot of folks. Their civilization spanned Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, Guatemala, and Belize. And they survived mainly on agriculture. The thing is, the Yucatan Peninsula was an extremely difficult place to grow crops. So the Mayans had to develop a complex irrigation system in most of their cities. They built a series of ceremonial buildings, pyramids, and plazas. The Mayans might have been keen pyramid builders, but they also developed an advanced astronomical system. With whatever ancient technology they had, they were able to predict the exact location of planets such as Venus and Mars, as well as the exact dates of eclipses. If you've ever seen examples of ancient Mayan cities, this is Tikal. Located at the heart of the Guatemalan jungle, Tikal is believed to have been the capital of the ancient Mayan conquest state. At its height, it was comparable in importance to cities such as London or New York in today's world. It's composed of a series of complex monuments. The North Acropolis is one of Tikal's most ancient complexes of monuments. Built solely by human hands around 350 BCE, it served as the resting place of kings and chiefs. Its monuments are up to 200 feet high. Back in the day, the step pyramid temples were painted a beautiful red. Mayans loved that color. Today, of course, you'll only see the limestone. Then there's Chichen Itza. It's got one of the best preserved pyramids on Earth to date. Located in Mexico's Yucatan state, this Mayan city is well over 1,500 years old. At its peak, it was home to 35,000 people. The site covers 4 square miles of land. The highlight is El Castillo, a tremendous step-like temple standing 80 feet above ground. Its most peculiar feature is that it has 91 steps up each of its 4 sides, including the upper platform, which makes for 365 steps, the same number of days as the solar year. You can see that these folks were a pretty big deal, huh? That's why nobody can really understand what happened to them. There's a big lack of evidence on the decline of this almighty empire. What could have been the cause of their demise? Was it a drought? New research in 2017 did bring some new discoveries into the mix. Using data from a site at Ceibal, located at southwest of Tikal, scientists analyzed radiocarbon data from ceramics and archaeological excavations to extract new information about the unexpected demise of this great civilization. The information shows that instead of a sudden collapse, the Mayans most likely fell in waves of social instability and political crises. These events are believed to have deteriorated Mayan city centers and began causing the dispersion of the Mayan population. It's hard to pinpoint the exact causes, though. But hey, recent discoveries are shedding a big light on humanity's past. Not only about the Mayan Empire, but about other long-lost civilizations of South America. A major recent discovery in Brazil was done using satellite imaging technology and is also shocking scientists. Some images from near the Xingu River, also in the Amazon, suggest that cities of millions of people might have existed inside the jungle, way before our modern civilization ever existed. I mean, if this doesn't shock you, I don't know what will. Satellite imagery also detected a network of trenches dating back to 200 and 1200 CE in the Bolivian Amazon forest. These proofs suggest settlements that could have supported around 60,000 people right in the middle of the Amazon forest. When researchers from the University of Florida went on ground to check the satellite information, they were shocked to find several mounds that were accompanied by ditches and geoglyphs. Archaeologists also found remnants of carefully designed walls centered around plazas, much like the type of construction done by the ancient Mayans.
Listen to this. Neanderthal fiber technology. Nope, I'm not joking. The concept is real. In 2020, a team of scientists published a paper that redefined the way we saw our closest ancestors. A find in France changed archaeology forever, and it wasn't the first time something like this had happened. But let me start from the beginning. Neanderthals. For a long time, they fit the image of the typical cavemen. If you are now thinking of someone like Fred Flintstone, you wouldn't be much wrong. What was the reason behind this stereotype? When did we start believing that Neanderthals were not the brightest tools in the shed of evolution? In comes William King, a 19th century British geologist. He was the man who named the Neanderthals. Based on the bones King found, the scientist declared the species not intelligent, and this image stuck with the Neanderthals for centuries to come. But a piece of string, just a quarter of an inch long, changed everything. A small, dry river valley, Abri du Maras, was the place of the great find. Archaeologists unearthed a cord fragment next to a stone tool. Such twisted fibers could have been used for everything from making clothes to fishing nets. In prehistory, this was some advanced tech, and the Neanderthals seemed to have mastered it. Scientists already knew that these early humans made tar from birch bark, and that they produced shell beads. There's even evidence of Neanderthal art. They were definitely not primitive. The string section and similar finds are changing the way we perceive our ancestors. The world of archaeology is constantly changing. Take the pyramids in Egypt, for example. Turns out, they weren't really built by an army of people who the pharaoh made work until they passed out. Herodotus, the famous Greek historian, was the man who started the confusion. He claimed, in 500 BCE, that 100,000 men took part in the construction of the Great Pyramid in Giza. He made no mention of who they were and why they were building the pyramids. That's how the myth started. Huge stone slabs pulled by humans, driven by a foreman with a whip. But Egyptologists would beg to differ. Those are the scientists who study ancient Egypt's culture. Fairly recently, they uncovered a workers' village that told a different tale. Yes, there was evidence of hard work on the workers' bones, but the construction industry is demanding even today. It took almost 6 years for 12,000 workers to complete the world's tallest building, Burj Khalifa. Back in Egypt, 3 times more workers finished the Great Pyramid in around 2 decades. An impressive feat of ancient engineering, wouldn't you agree? Superiors looked well after the Egyptians who built the pyramids. Their diet was rich in protein. They had medical care and they got paid properly. In fact, they lived better than the non-working population. And they lived with their families near the construction site. Archaeologists know all this because they unearthed bakeries and dormitories with bread jars and other goodies. Looks like the pharaohs were okay employers after all, and the job market wasn't that terrible. They also kept detailed papyrus records of the build and hieroglyphs. You and I wouldn't stand a chance of reading these letters that resemble images. Egyptologists had the same problem. For over a millennium, no one had used this type of font. And it's not like there was an English ancient Egyptian dictionary you could open and find meanings of words. But all this changed in 1822. A couple of decades before, the French found a broken slab of black granite. The stone contained 1 text in 3 scripts: Ancient Greek, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Demotic. The last one was also the Egyptian language, but in a simplified script. Scientists dated it back to 196 BCE. The content is a religious proclamation. A French philologist and Orientalist, Jean-François Champollion, was the first one to crack the code. You see, people haven't forgotten ancient Greek letters. The Frenchman successfully matched the Greek letters with the ones in the Egyptian script. And voila, we were finally able to read hieroglyphs. The name of the piece of granite that made it all possible was the Rosetta Stone. The importance of its discovery went beyond archaeology. The word Rosetta Stone even entered the English dictionary. It represents a discovery that helps people understand an enigma that has been puzzling them for a long time. There are similar games. A symbol is attached to a particular message. Then you have to decode the message by replacing the symbol with a corresponding letter. In a nutshell, this is what scientists did with the Rosetta Stone more than 2 centuries ago. Do you know what is the oldest deciphered language in Europe? It has an unattractive name, Linear B. The script belongs to the Mycenaean Greek language. It predates the ancient Greek alphabet by several centuries. You can easily guess which script it is descended from. Linear A. The people from Crete used Linear B more than 1,000 years ago. During the Late Bronze Age, the Greek civilization that used the script vanished. There was no one who could read Linear B, and more importantly, no one knew it existed in the first place. This was about to change during the first years of the 20th century. A British archaeologist by the name of Sir Arthur Evans excavated a vast palace complex at Knossos, Crete, Greece. This was the center of the Minoan culture that created the enigmatic script. The palace boasted some 1,300 rooms. They had colorful paintings of dolphins, griffins, and bulls. All of these captivated the archaeologist's imagination. But their biggest find was at first overlooked. Thousands of slabs of baked clay. The fire that brought down the palace helped preserve the tablets. It was impossible to read the slabs, though. They were written in an unknown language. The scientific community had to wait for another half a century before Michael Ventris cracked the code. He was an English architect and cryptographer. Ventris studied Greek and Latin. While attending the famous archaeologist's lecture, the young man decided to solve the puzzle of Linear B once and for all. He managed to do so in 1952. One of Ventris's most amazing discoveries was that the script was an archaic form of Greek. But cryptology still hasn't solved the code of Linear A. This writing system will remain a mystery until a motivated young person like Michael Ventris comes along. They wouldn't have to be a professional archaeologist. Basil Brown certainly wasn't. Yet in 1939 he discovered the richest early medieval tomb in Europe. This happened in Sutton Hoo in the southeast of England. This wasn't an ordinary tomb made out of stone. It was a full-size ship, 3 times as long as a London double-decker bus. And that's not all. Apart from its main purpose, the ship was full of riches. Deluxe hanging bowls, feasting vessels, gold and dress accessories, and luxurious textiles were just some of the treasures found. Archaeologists were also amazed by the silverware from distant Byzantium. You probably know this city as Istanbul, Turkey. Even in our age, it's several days' drive from Sutton Hoo. Just imagine how much time and money it cost to import a silver plate in the 7th century. That's when the ship went down, according to archaeologists. The English couldn't have done it. At that time, there was no England. The people living in the British Isles at the time were the Anglo-Saxons. Perhaps the ship from the grassy mounds in Suffolk belonged to one of their kings? We will never know. The local acidic soil did away with any possible evidence, or no one laid there in the first place. It could have been a cenotaph, which is a monument constructed to honor an important person. The archaeologists still don't have a definite answer. But what they have found at Sutton Hoo shed light on the Dark Ages. Before the discovery of the ship, they knew little about what had been going on in Britain after the Romans left. Now, the image of the early Anglo-Saxon society was much clearer. Perhaps the English soil will be the site of the next great breakthrough in archaeology. Whenever you hear about ancient ruins, you almost never picture them being suspended somewhere, or just randomly hanging on the branch of a tree, right? In fact, for most of the ancient artifacts we have exposed in museums all over the world, archaeologists did quite an impressive amount of digging. You see, buildings have this funny way of fading away over time if not properly taken care of. Sometimes we need to reuse some building materials, so an older construction may be sacrificed in the process. Other times, houses are abandoned, and once they are exposed to the elements on the surface, like rain or sunlight, they don't really stand a chance. Some just simply crumble away due to good old erosion. So the only way a piece of architecture can survive the test of time is if it's somehow gotten buried deep down. Now, how did they end up buried in the first place? Well, it's quite the comedy of errors. Ancient cities had a habit of gradually raising their ground level like a kid adding toppings to their ice cream sundae. You see, these settlements were always busy collecting food and building materials to keep up with their ever-growing population. But hey, who has time to deal with waste and rubbish? It wasn't exactly high on their to-do list back in the day. So when it came to building new houses, Ancient civilizations found it much easier to save their sweat and tears by piling up the rubble and constructing right on top. But that's not all. Rivers would also occasionally flood and deposit a layer of sediment on the city floors, further encapsulating those ancient constructions. And in those dry regions like the desert, where the wind likes to show off its sand and dust dance moves, you can bet it was a constant struggle to keep the establishments clean. One hilarious example is the Sphinx, which had its head buried in sand until a group of archaeologists unearthed it in 1817. Some ancient towns eventually got covered up because they were completely abandoned. With less human activity to control their expansion, plant seeds couldn't resist the opportunity and sprouted all over the place. They gobbled up carbon dioxide from the air and grew, adding more and more bulk to the ground. Those cheeky roots even decided to stabilize the soil made from decaying plant matter, creating layers upon layers of earthy goodness. It's like the ultimate DIY project Mother Nature embarked on, with plants as her loyal helpers. The act of digging into the secrets of ancient civilizations is not just about unearthing a lost world. It's also an epic quest to reveal the hidden treasures beneath layers of history. But how do archaeologists know where to dig in the first place? If everything is covered in layers upon layers of sediments, debris, and plant roots, they must have some sort of system they rely on before embarking on a new project, right? For starters, they're not always the ones suggesting an archaeological dig in a certain location. Let me explain. Let's say you're a contractor and you want to build a new fancy apartment complex in your city. Some local legislations have certain requirements before your project can start, though. For instance, before anyone starts building on a piece of land, they might need to bring in specialists to check the soil. These clever folks can be archaeologists, geologists, or paleontologists, and they need to keep an eye on things during development. If any artifacts or ecofacts, fancy word for organic remnants, are discovered, these experts swoop in to excavate and study them. But what about sites that have nothing to do with bulldozers and yellow hats? Archaeologists have more than one trick up their sleeves when it comes to locating ancient hotspots. They dive deep into historic records with a healthy dose of detective work. By sniffing out old documents and maps, they can piece together the puzzle of human activity in a specific area. If a site has been visited before, it's even better. Finding records of past excavations or historical accounts can give archaeologists lots of information on where to continue their treasure hunt. Before archaeologists start swinging their shovels, they engage in a bit of a visual scan mission. Armed with a grid system, they'll stroll around the site, keeping their eyes peeled for any artifacts that might be hiding just beneath the Earth's upper layer. From groundstone tools to historic glass and even ancient garbage dumps, yes, they're also valuable. These keen-eyed explorers can spot signs of human activity faster than most people. If they stumble upon midden soil, fancy term for a garbage dump, they know for sure that humans once called this place home. Archaeologists don't just rely on their trusty shovels, though. They have an arsenal of gadgets to aid in their search for hidden wonders. Geophysical tools are like their secret weapons. Take the resistivity meter, for example. This clever contraption measures the electrical component of the soil and any buried features or artifacts. A buried wall, for instance, will create a different resistivity reading than the surrounding soil. Magnetometers and ground-penetrating radar work in similar ways, showcasing potential hints of ancient treasures in the soil. And who could forget our trusty old friend, the GPS? It helps archaeologists map out precise locations, like a high-tech treasure map, leading them straight to their pot of gold. Care to virtually visit some of the most important archaeological sites in the world? Well, follow me. In the United Kingdom, for instance, you'll find this interesting place called Stonehenge. It's one of many henges scattered around, but this one really takes the cake. Picture this: massive ancient stones standing tall and proud, arranged in a funky outer ring and an inner horseshoe, with some smaller stones thrown in for good measure. And guess what? These amazing stones have been around for over 5,000 years. Talk about a serious case of rock-solid longevity. Now, here's where it gets interesting. According to local folklore, the legendary wizard Merlin whipped out his magic wand and poof! He teleported these massive stones all the way from Ireland. Apparently, some giants had assembled them there, but Merlin decided they would look much better at their new location. Others think it's just the ruined remains of an old Roman spiritual edifice. These amazing structures were built by our Bronze Age ancestors. With their simple tools and limited tech, they managed to create this monumental masterpiece. Impressive, right? Unfortunately, there's still so much we don't know about this area. Stonehenge's initial purpose remains a mystery to this day. Sure, there are lots of theories, but scientists have yet to agree on the subject. However, we do know that it's perfectly aligned to catch the sunrise during the summer and winter solstices. The ancient city of Pompeii is an equally amazing archaeological site. Picture this. Mount Vesuvius, a notorious troublemaker, decided to throw a volcanic tantrum and completely covered this ancient Roman city. It turned it into a time capsule, located outside present-day Naples in Italy. Fast forward to the year 1748, when a bunch of adventurous explorers stumbled upon Pompeii. Lo and behold, they discovered a treasure trove of well-preserved goodies, streets, houses, food, probably a bit stale by then, blingy jewelry, fancy sculptures, colorful frescoes, everyday household items, and even animal and human remains. It was like an epic archaeological party. From the looks of it, Pompeii had it all. Fancy houses and villas, a massive 20,000-seat arena, cute little artisan shops, hangouts like taverns. And let's not forget the saucy spots like those luxurious bathhouses for some intense pampering. There's also the Sanctuary of Apollo, where people used to gather for their daily dose of worship. And of course, the bustling heart of the city, the Forum of Pompeii, where all the cool people used to hang out. And guess what? Pompeii is so cool that it made it to UNESCO's World Heritage List back in 1997. That's like the ultimate Hall of Fame for historical awesomeness. It also includes many other famous buildings and sites, like the Taj Mahal in India and the Acropolis of Athens in Greece.
Most people know that pyramids were built as grand tombs for the pharaohs, designed to ensure they had a smooth journey to the afterlife. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, was constructed for the pharaoh Khufu. But what most people don't know is that this whole pyramid building trend started right here with the step pyramid of Djoser about 4,700 years ago. This massive structure was built for Pharaoh Djoser, a ruler from Egypt's 3rd dynasty. It rises 7 layers high above the ground and stands about 200 feet tall. We think of it today as a phenomenal architectural project, but for ancient Egyptians, the step pyramid of Djoser turned out to be more like a massive experiment, a trial run, if you will, to perfect their building skills before they moved on to even more ambitious pyramids. Reaching new heights is super exciting, but the real mystery is what is going on below the ground. In this pyramid's underground labyrinth, there is a network of tunnels stretching about 3.5 miles long, and some researchers believe these tunnels might have been part of a sophisticated water system that could completely change what we think about pyramid construction. Let's talk about this massive complex located in Saqqara. Surrounding the pyramid, there's what's known as a dry moat, a continuous trench that is up to 164 feet wide and almost 2 miles long. It forms a sort of rectangular shape around the pyramid. This trench has an average depth of about 65 feet. Now, if you were to add up all the earth and rock they dug out to create this moat, it would be about 10 times the volume of the step pyramid itself. For the longest time, people just assumed this trench was nothing more than a huge quarry, a place where they dug up stone and clay to build the step pyramid. Makes sense, right? But when you take a closer look, it doesn't add up. The trench is too narrow and deep to be practical for mining, and its layout doesn't match anything we know about ancient Egyptian quarrying methods. Plus, some sections of the trench are actually covered with a rocky ceiling, which would have made it nearly impossible to use as a quarry. Another theory suggests that the dry moat had some kind of spiritual significance. Maybe it was a sacred place, where souls of nobles gathered to serve the late king in the afterlife. There are even niches in the walls that work as a hint at this spiritual function. But most researchers believe that this purpose likely developed much later, long after the complex was built for Djoser. So what was the moat really designed for? In 2020, a researcher came up with a pretty intriguing idea. It is possible that this trench was actually designed to collect and manage water, especially after heavy rainfalls. Now, that makes sense when you consider the location. The moat sits in an area that could easily have been flooded by runoff water from nearby plains. This could also explain why the trench wasn't used for new graves until much later when the climate became drier and less prone to flooding. The story becomes even more intriguing, as this trench appears to be part of a larger, more complex hydraulic system within the Djoser complex. It is like the trench has several compartments, carefully carved out of the rock and connected by tunnels. These compartments likely served as a part of a water treatment system, where water would flow from one compartment to the next, getting cleaner as it moved along. Now, here is where things start to tie into the pyramid itself. The Djoser complex has a series of underground shafts, and some researchers think that water from the moat's deep trench might have been used to power a hydraulic lift system, and this giant water-powered elevator could have been used to raise the heavy stones needed to build the pyramid. It worked like a volcano, but instead of lava, water did the heavy lifting. Imagine a big deep hole in the ground at the center of the pyramid site. Inside this hole, there was a huge wooden platform, kind of like a giant raft that could move up and down. When the workers wanted to lift a heavy stone, they would fill the hole with water. As the water rose, the wooden platform started to float up, carrying the stone with it, almost like a giant water-powered elevator. When the stone reached the right height, the workers slid it off the platform and onto the pyramid. The idea is that water from the deep trench, after being cleaned and filtered, would flow into these shafts. A massive float, possibly made of wood, would then rise as the water filled the shaft, lifting the stones up to where they were needed for construction. Once the stone was in place, they'd let the water out, lowering the platform back down to the bottom, ready to lift the next stone. This fancy hydraulic lift system could have been a game changer, making the whole building process a lot faster and more efficient without using a lot of workforce. It is like the ancient Egyptians were already embracing the whole idea of work smarter, not harder. But of course, not everyone is on board with this theory. Some experts argue that the area where the step pyramid of Djoser was built couldn't have held enough water from occasional rains to maintain such a fancy hydraulic system. The main theory suggests that, in the past, there might have been some kind of lake nearby that would have filled up after a period of rain, and this lake could have supplied water to the complex's hydraulic system. But there is no mention of such a lake in any ancient Egyptian writings, so it might be more of a what-if situation than a reality. And then there's the issue of the hard work itself. Remember when I said this method could have allowed the ancient builders to raise stones with far less effort? Well, that might not be entirely true. According to some experts, just building this hydraulic device would have required a lot more heavy work than simply moving the stone blocks using good old-fashioned manpower. And let's not forget, the step pyramid of Djoser is like a baby pyramid compared to those that came later. The stones used for Djoser's pyramid weighed, on average, about 660 pounds each, which is nothing compared to the more than 2.5-ton blocks used later for the pyramid of Chephren. If this cool water lift theory gets completely ruled out, we still need to explain how this pyramid was built in the first place. To answer that, we need to rewind a bit and talk about the original plans. See, before Djoser's tomb became a pyramid, the idea was to construct a simple mastaba. This type of tomb was pretty common in earlier periods, a flat-roofed, rectangular structure with sloping sides. But after the original mastaba was finished, they decided to expand it a bit by adding more layers on top. And then they added even more layers, until the construction reached 6 distinctive steps, each one smaller than the previous. And they probably did all this by raising those heavy stones using ramps, not a water-powered elevator. There is still so much we don't know about the step pyramid of Djoser. More research is definitely needed to fully understand how this system worked, or if it even existed at all. But the idea of using water to help build the pyramid adds a whole new layer to our understanding of ancient Egyptian engineering. It's a powerful reminder of just how clever and resourceful those builders were, using the natural landscape and the power of water to create one of the most iconic monuments in history.
You're walking down the street. You see a strange-looking antique shop called Ageless Trinkets of Mr. Bright. You're curious, so you enter there. You take a look at all the weird stuff. Suddenly, an old folded parchment paper catches your attention. It's a world map, but something's off with it. Instead of showing the countries as you know them, it shows the locations of 4 mythical lost worlds and civilizations. Mr. Bright, the shop owner, comes next to you after realizing your shock. This map won't let you find these places or anything, but I can explain to you the legends behind them if you want, he says. Let me begin with Atlantis. You might know it as Aquaman's underwater kingdom, but Atlantis, the fictional island, was actually first introduced in 2 of Plato's works. According to him, Atlantis was a highly advanced civilization that existed about 9,000 years before his own time, and its story had been passed down by poets, authors, and others. He wrote about Atlantis and its citizens to give a moral lesson and to teach about the dangers of arrogance, as well as the eventual downfall of those who are after too much power. In his dialogues, Plato stated that Atlantis was a great and powerful empire that was respected in all parts of the world. It was founded by beings who were half deities and half human, and became a great naval power after a while. Being an island filled with gold, silver, and other precious metals certainly helped their case. But besides that, it was also known for its breathtaking architecture and state-of-the-art technology, as well as its countless rare and exotic wild animals. Atlanteans were proud of their great achievements and the perfection of their civilization, but their excessive pride was going to bring their downfall. They believed they were so superior that they could gain control over any nation. This led them to launch a series of invasions. They conquered many of the Mediterranean lands, but when it was time to enter Athens, Athenians pushed back with an extraordinary force, so the Atlanteans were finally defeated. Plato stated that deities then got angry at Atlanteans because of how wicked, greedy, and immoral they became. So they punished them by sending earthquakes, which caused Atlantis to sink beneath the sea. Although the earliest written records of Atlantis were Plato's works, some people still believed his story to be based on truth and tried to identify the island of Atlantis with actual countries. Some people suggested it may have been located in the Mediterranean Sea, near the coast of Spain or Italy. Others thought it may have been located in the Caribbean, off the coast of Central or South America, but there was no solid evidence to support any of these claims. One theory, in particular, seemed more plausible than the others, though. Located in the Aegean Sea, the island of Santorini was the home of a highly advanced Minoan society. However, due to a huge volcanic eruption, it was destroyed about 3,600 years ago, causing the Minoan civilization to suddenly disappear. These similarities between the fictional Atlanteans and the historical Minoans made Santorini a good candidate for the speculations. Yet again, there were still major flaws with it, such as how the time when Plato said Atlantis was destroyed doesn't coincide with the time of Santorini's eruption. So Atlantis still continues to be regarded as nothing more than a popular legend in the scientific world. Now, let's move toward the northeast direction on the map, Mr. Bright says. According to Celtic Breton mythology, there once was a magnificent city called Ys, also known as Caris, that towered over Douarnenez Bay in France's Brittany region. It was the most wealthy city in the entire Atlantic. It was especially famous for its beautiful gardens and buildings, and its citizens were all living comfortably and happily there. Dahut, who was King Bradlon's daughter in Breton legends and literature, had a deep love for the sea. She begged her father to build a city at the edge of the sea, and that is how the city of Ys was established. Little did she know that she would be the one responsible for the destruction of her father's beloved gift. You see, since the city was surrounded by the sea, it needed to be protected by a dike equipped with floodgates, and these gates could only be opened at low tide. And the only one who had the keys to these gates was the king himself. One day, a handsome red knight arrived at the city, but couldn't pass the gates. Dahut was so taken by him that she wanted to let him in. She knew that her father was the keeper of the only key to the city, so she sneaked into his room and stole it from him. Then she gave it to the Red Knight so that he could enter the city and they could be together. However, the Red Knight turned out to be the Prince of Darkness, and he intentionally left the gate open to the raging sea. The waves soon swallowed all of Ys. King Gradlon was able to escape on his magical horse, but Dahut couldn't. She turned into an evil mermaid who lured sailors into the sea. Today, if you go to Quimper, a city in Brittany, northwest France, you can find the statue of King Gradlon riding on his horse. Although the city of Ys is a legend, Brittany coast locals believe that on the days when the waters are calm, you can still hear the tolls of the city bells deep under the sea, if you listen carefully. Mr. Bright then points at the Indian Ocean on the map and says, "Now, have you heard about Lemuria?" Back in the mid-1800s, a few scientists suggested that there was once a continent that existed in the Indian Ocean, somewhere close to the south of modern-day Sri Lanka. The first one to popularize this theory was the British lawyer and zoologist Philip Lutley Sclater. In his paper, The Mammals of Madagascar, he stated that he found lemur fossils in India, and not in Africa. However, this discovery was extremely shocking to him because of the fact that lemurs' original homeland, Madagascar, is much closer to Africa. He proposed that this was possible only if some larger continent connected the two once. He stated that this continent must have eventually sunk to the ocean floor. He then named it Lemuria, and hence the theory was born. People who came after Sclater took his theory a step further and thought that Lemuria was also the home of an extinct race of humans called Lemurians, who had 4 arms and enormous bodies, and were also the ancestors of modern-day humans, as well as lemurs. Of course, as new scientific discoveries were made on plate tectonics, evolution, and the study of DNA, the theories regarding the fictional continent called Lemuria were debunked. The last fictional land on the map is Agartha, Mr. Bright says. Taking its roots from Eastern mysticism, one legend says there's a kingdom called Agartha that is located deep beneath the surface of the earth. It's where all 4 corners of the world are connected by paths and tunnels. It is said that there's a secret entrance into Agartha hidden in the Gobi Desert, and it's built by Agarthans themselves using advanced technology that can't be detected by us, the surface folks. According to some beliefs, Agartha exists to counterbalance the energies of those who live above the surface. While we live in a state of rush and heightened emotions, this world beneath us is the total opposite. Some even say that those who escaped Atlantis fled here to continue their lives inside the Earth's core. And yet, others think it's actually a land that's crawling with all kinds of monsters. But there's no need to be scared, since modern science proved Earth's core is not actually hollow and is a solid hot iron ball. So you can cancel your journey plans to the center of the Earth if you've made any. Thanks, Mr. Bright.